Arabaragani?
Nia.
Arabaragani?
Nia.
Very good, very good. I wish to begin with Romans, 12th chapter, and the 2nd verse, which teaches us that, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove that what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. Our principle this evening is purpose, and that should always be our purpose, to renew our minds and not to be conformed with the world, especially the way the world is as we speak. I'm always happy to come before this group because, and it is dear to my heart because, first of all, my mother was a nurse. Pearl Maxwell Fordham, who served from 1950 to 1982, over from Charleston's Black Hospital, McClellan Banks Hospital, on to Old Ropers, then retiring at MUSC in 1982. That ties into all of this because you see, McClellan Banks Hospital, our city's African American hospital, was named after two giants in our community, Dr. Alonzo McClellan and Miss Anna DaCosta Banks. She was an inspiration to many young black girls in this town because that was about the highest position that an African American young lady can have in those days. And she showed a lot of young black girls that they could be more than their lives, than what they saw before them. And she spoke out also on issues regarding the health care, as well as local services in regard to African Americans. You see, it was the black nurses in this city who were among the most well-paid black women in our city. They also, of course, played the major role in 1969 when they had the hospital workers strike, which was one of the major events of the civil rights movement in this area. And I would encourage you, young people, if your grandmothers or great-grandmothers took part in that strike, sit down with them with a recording device and pen and paper and write those stories down for reasons that I will go into a little later on in this discussion. You see, young people in particular today, we need to know this because I'm going to be totally honest with you. We, to be honest, are in danger of living in a dark time of confusion and despair. Many have been caught off guard by the recent mistrial of Michael Slater, as well as the events at Mother Emanuel and the election of Donald Trump as the president. The reaction to some of these things show that many people really need to learn and understand the law and how it works, as well as politics and how that works. And a lot of this, especially among the young, is for the following reasons. Many young people today did not have the good fortune of growing up in homes that had the strong leadership of bygone days. Many did not have the cohesive communities and leaders, strong solutions of bygone days. And so in absence of that, many of them are searching for direction, and they find direction lacking. So often they find it in the wrong places, on the internet, from people who are not very well informed. You have this phenomenon right now. A lot of young people in their teens, and 20s, and 30s, going around saying that they're woke. That all of a sudden they have this knowledge that no one else has, and so they're woke. And they call everybody else who may not agree with them or know some of the things that they know, all sorts of vulgar and filthy names and such. But let's break that down for a moment, okay? So if you're in your 20s and your 30s and call yourselves woke, listen to this. Many of you know that there was a great man in our community by the name of Mr. Esau Jenkins, who was born in 1910 on Johns Island. And he never got past the 4th grade because it was a common thing in his day for them to pull young African American children out of school and send them in the cotton fields, in the bean fields, and the tomato fields in order to make a living for their families. But he didn't let that stop him. There was a great lady who taught him who lived right here on President Street by the name of Miss Septima Poinsett Clark, a survivor of the Charleston race riot of 1919, a 1916 graduate of Avery Institute. Ezekwe earlier mentioned Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the co-founder of the NAACP, and he spoke at Ms. Clark's graduation. This great lady took her knowledge and wisdom out to Johns Island and gave some of that to Esau Jenkins. And he took what little he had and created businesses, two of which still exist in our community today. The C&O Credit Union and the Hotspot Record Shop are run by his children and some of his other relatives. But he said something that I want everyone who thinks that they are woke to consider. In the last speech he made in 1972, and I recorded this in my book, True Stories of Black South Carolina, he told the young graduating class at Hot Gap Middle School to never feel that they are better than their parents because they may have had more education than their parents have. Because guess what? Your parents may know something that you don't know. And the great Egyptian philosopher Ptahhotep once said in 2300 BC, "Do not be proud and arrogant with your knowledge, for wisdom can be found in women at the millstones." And then there was the great Philip Simmons, right here in Charleston, the blacksmith, born in 1912 on Daniels Island, learned the blacksmithing art at the age of 13 from a former slave named Peter Simmons from Mount Pleasant. And he went on to grace the city of Charleston with his ironwork, so much so that President Ronald Reagan gave him an award for his contribution to the American arts. The work he did truly spoke for him. Anyway, in about 1998, myself and my nephew Quadro Campbell took a group of young children to meet Mr. Simmons. And here he was in his 90s at Blake Street. And he took these young children and he made iron initials for each of them. And one little girl asked him, "Mr. Simmons, how did you learn to be a blacksmith?" And at the age of 90-something, he looked at that child and said, "I'm still learning." That's what life is all about. Yes. So if a man old enough to be in his 90s knows that as long as you are alive on this earth, even though you may be considered a teacher, you are still a student of life, and he understands that even at his age, he had more to learn, what you doing 20 and 30 years old calling yourself woke? Come on, you gotta think about this. So, and then to make matters worse, a lot of them get the information from the wrong places, getting them from YouTube videos on the internet filled with wild conspiracy theories, gross misinformation. One of these characters even saying that Mother Emanuel was a hoax. Yes. Lord have mercy. Telling them all the sorts of nonsense. And then some of the people who they call their leaders are on YouTube and Facebook, cursing each other out, making videos slamming each other. What kind of leadership is that? Ladies and gentlemen, that is if Ray Charles was the general, telling Stevie Wonder and all of the soldiers who are blind to follow him while they're marching. If the blind lead the blind, they fall into a ditch. But you know what? I understand that is not entirely the fault of some of these young people. They had no guidance in many cases. In many cases, they were not pushed properly to learn in school, and there was chaos in the classroom. And when you are desperate and stuck at the bottom of a well, you tend not to ask a whole lot of questions of any hand that offers to pull you out. So it is up to us, those of us who were born and raised under good parentage, good cohesive communities, good leadership, to teach these young people what we once knew ourselves. Right? Now, which brings me to the point of the issue of education. You have so often, instead of encouraging children to do well in school. Now I understand, folks, I get very frustrated, with my young nieces and nephews sometimes. I mean, I get that. When you see them doing things like trying to eat a jelly sandwich on the table with their hands behind their back and making a mess. Or you're tempted to question their intelligence and do things like that. But this is where we have to be careful. the tongue can be a dangerous sword. If we go around constantly telling our children how dumb and stupid and ignorant they are, guess what? They might believe that. If we go, and if let's say we happen to be mad with the child's mother or mad at the child's father, and we go around saying, you're going to go on to jail just like your daddy, or you're going to walk the streets just like your mother, and they go out and they do those things, people wonder what happened. They're only doing what you program them to do. So we have to watch that. And the prime example of how well that can work on the opposite level is like this, ladies and gentlemen. You see, back in 1969, some of you might remember when man walked on the moon. Well, they splashed down off the coast of Hawaii, and President Richard Nixon came there to greet the astronauts. And thousands of people came to the docks to watch President Nixon greet these astronauts. And in that audience, a grandfather had his 6-year-old grandson up on his shoulders. And he said, son, let me show you something. This is what Americans can do once we put our mind to it. That grandfather filled that grandson with a positive mind. He told him what he could do, not what he couldn't do. And guess what? He's in the White House now. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
And when we get upset over legal decisions, for example, when it was announced that Slager had a mistrial, people thought it was all over, that Slager had gone free, not understanding that a mistrial just meant they had to try it all over again. So a lot of people vented their frustrations and they got information from other people who didn't know what they were talking about when it came to the law, and it caused a lot of needless confusion within our community. Once again, Ray Charles leading Stevie across the street. Ladies and gentlemen, there's this thing called the Constitution of the United States. The law of the land. You can get it for only about $1 or $2 at the Barnes & Noble. And if you don't understand parts of it, there's another thing called the dictionary that you could also use to look through that. And then too, with this thing with Donald Trump. When that happened, people wanted to stop the Electoral College. Not understanding that it takes 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the House of Representatives, and 3/4 of the states to do something like that. And by the time they tried to do that, he would have been in already anyway. And then some people got mad. They wanted to march. They wanted to riot when Trump was president. Hold up. If you want to exercise your constitutional rights, that's fine. But before you march against President Trump, you have to ask yourself this. Did you make that march to the voting booth on election day? And if you didn't,
This real talk.
and you call yourself wanting to protest this, I'm going to tell you just like Beyonce did in that recent song, tell them, boy, bye. You know? No. This is where you have to take control of your lives. Some people will say, oh, well, I don't know nothing about politics. Hold up. If you can tell me who is going to be in the NBA Finals, who is going to be in the Super Bowl, what song is on the popular charts, wait, how do you know that stuff? You study it, right? So if you can study those type of things, and there's nothing wrong with that, because the great Egyptian teacher Ptahhotep once said that he who is always foolish will never own his home, but he who is always serious will never know a good time. All things in balance, nothing wrong with that. But if you know about these other things, you should take the time to learn about the things that control your life, so you can take control of your life. Right. You see, the great Frederick Douglass once taught us that we have so much to learn, but yet so much to unlearn. We have to learn how to take control of our communities, because Dr. King once said something key in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? He said that when you deal with your adversaries and your opponents, we must be just as armed with knowledge as they are, which means we got a lot of studying to do. about the law, about politics, about land deals, and how we can take control of these things and make a better community. Because, and you see, a lot of people go around sad because there is no leadership that's quite on the level of a Dr. King, of an Esau Jenkins, of a Septima Clark, of a Medgar Evers, of a Malcolm X. Because see, in those days, those folks didn't do that for money. There was no money in it. Today, you have a lot of people who say what people, find out what people want to hear and say it so they can get paid. There's a difference. Right. But in the absence of wise leadership, here's what you do, ladies and gentlemen. You know, every Sunday morning in church, the preachers know that Moses is no longer working with us. They know that David and Joshua are no longer walking with us, and that Jesus Christ may not be here walking physically among us in human form. So what do? They teach you what they said in the Bible, so that what these men said, did, and taught can live through you. You have wise teachers and wise parents who teach you, the teachers teach you about English, science, mathematics, and various other things. The parents, if they are good and wise, teach you how to live as independent and decent human beings. Why? So that they're gone, you can take care of yourself, and their teachings can live through you. We must do this with the teachings of the greats of our people. We must take the time to look them up in libraries and talk to the elders who once walked the earth with these people, so that in the absence of great leadership, we can learn their teachings, and those teachings can live through us and make us a better people, and to make a new heaven and a new earth, and that should be your purpose. Mm-hmm. Before I forget, one more thing. Many years ago, in times that were far worse than this, back in 1899, the great leader Booker T. Washington was supposed to speak in Jacksonville, Jacksonville, Florida. And for those of you who don't know, in Jacksonville, at Jacksonville at that time, there was a teacher by the name of James Weldon Johnson, who would later become the secretary of the NAACP. Booker T. Washington was a man who, born in slavery, and walked 400 miles from Walden, West Virginia, to Hampton, Virginia, to get an education at Hampton Institute. And James Weldon Johnson was distressed because in 1899, that was the time of lynching. That was the time of Jim Crow. That was the time of segregation. That was the time when we had far less constitutional rights than we have now. But he wanted to write something that would not only celebrate Booker T. Washington coming here, but he wanted to write something that would encourage that generation of young people that was going through those hard times. And all of a sudden, the words came to him. And he wrote a song that went something like this.